Hello there and welcome to a special Bobeats episode because today we are checking out the new Polybrute 12 from Arturia. If you're already familiar with the Polybrute, this is essentially the same synth but with 12 voices instead of 6. And with an upgraded keybed that doesn't just feel better, but it also sports polyphonic aftertouch. And a couple of really interesting polyphonic aftertouch modes called FullTouch modes that we'll explore more in today's video as well. And there's also the obvious physical difference of the synthesizer itself. It's overall a bit bigger, it's a bit higher as well, it's deeper, and there's also these vents. Because of the additional voices, it needed more cooling, but don't worry, there are no fans in this synthesizer. It doesn't make any noise. But other than that, it's physically very similar to the original Polybrute, if not completely identical, and if you know your way around a Polybrute, you'll have no problem using this. Today's video is a mix of different things. We're going to go over some of the new stuff, what you can use the 12 voices for. We're going to do a deep dive into the polyphonic aftertouch and the FullTouch modes. We're also going to do some patches from scratch, and potentially I have some tips that can help you on your own sound design journey. So let's get started with some music. To start off exploring the sound of the Polybrute 12, I've created a simple sawtooth patch. There's a bit of modulation going on, but nothing too fancy. I have a long release here on the sound that will give it a nice tail so you can hear how important those 12 voices are, because it's not stealing any voices. And just to create contrast and something to compare with, here's just one VCO playing a sawtooth. Note how there is no effects at all on this sound. And if you bring in the effects, it just becomes an even sweeter sound. 12 voices instead of 6, you can have a lot of overlapping notes. Now let's morph the sound. So morphing means that we have an A sound that sounds like this, and we can use the morph knob to not crossfade, but morph into a totally different sound. And what's really cool is that you cannot just morph between the extremes. You can also find nice sweet spots. Something that more voices also let you do is do more with unison. So here I just made a simple patch. Here's a sound in unison. And I've split the keyboard, so up here I'm playing a different sound. And with unison in poly mode, you can make some pretty huge sounds. Something that I recommend that you try in terms of setting up modulations on the Polybrute. This works with the Polybrute 6 as well, but it's even fatter with the 12, of course, is enabling unison and then hitting settings and turning this knob here and setting the stereo here to voice plus filter pan and distribution to gradual. And then you're setting the filters to parallel, giving you not only voice stereo spread, but also having a left and right filter. And then if we go to mod here, we can see that I've set up, for example, the cutoff here for both filters, and I have LFOs controlling the cutoff, and then I also have polyphonic aftertouch controlling the speed of the LFOs. And it just creates this huge sound, and yeah, it's something that works on the old Polybrute and the new. One of the new things with the Polybrute 12 is the new keybed. It's improved over the Polybrute 6, and it also features polyphonic aftertouch, which basically means that each key press triggers aftertouch independently. And if we go to mod here, you can see that we have aftertouch here as a mod source. So what Poly Aftertouch really does is give us individual articulation of the aftertouch per note being played. But more importantly than the Poly Aftertouch, I think, are the different Poly Aftertouch FullTouch modes that are available. Because if we take a normal sound with normal aftertouch, you can see and hear how the aftertouch engages when I'm pressing fairly hard on a key. And that doesn't give me a lot of travel. So the difference between engaging, triggering the aftertouch modulation and bottoming out isn't huge. And I've always found this limitation of aftertouch because I'm not a great keyboard player, so I often just like engage the modulation to max because I find it hard to articulate when it's just that little travel that I have to work with from the key engaging aftertouch to it bottoming out. Now, Arturia has solved this in a very nice way with Aftertouch modes. We set up a mod here from Aftertouch to global pitch. So you can hear that when I press down the key and engage the Aftertouch, it modulates the pitch. It's not meant to be beautiful, I'm just showing you this as an example of what it actually does. So now we can go to settings, expression control, and we go to keyboard, and we go to alternative aftertouch modes, and we go to FullTouch AT. This is the basic FullTouch mode, and listen now. So you can hear how the aftertouch is engaged as soon as I press a key. You can hear how we increase modulation by just pressing down the key, and we don't have to press very hard. But this is not the only aftertouch mode, so we go to expression control, keyboard. There's also FullTouch Z, and this lets us use this Z row to also set up additional modulations. So when I press a key, it's just a normal modulation that I'm engaging. But if I press it down and engage the aftertouch, something happens. I'm adding in stereo spread, increasing the delay level, and adding in a sub from oscillator 2. So it's basically like having two different kinds of aftertouch that I can engage with the key, like first the first one here, and then the second one. And it's really cool, actually. Now the third mode is probably the most interesting technically because it is FullTouch envelope aftertouch. This means that we're using aftertouch to control, or the FullTouch aftertouch to control the envelope. So if I set velocity to 100% and I play soft, but if I play hard, so as you can hear, we're getting a ton of expression, controlling the VCA depending on how much force I'm applying here and how much I press the key. And honestly, I think that these FullTouch modes adds something to the experience, because if you're like me and not a great player, the ability to have a modulation trigger, not just when you're pressing down really hard on the key, something which I'm kind of bad at, and instead having the full range of motion to play with, I think is great. So how do you go from a sawtooth to a sound like the one I played you? Well, first up, we're introducing the second oscillator. It's also just playing a sawtooth, and then we're going to introduce some attack, decay, some sustain, and a long release. Shave off some higher frequencies using the cutoff. We're going to tweak the filter envelope a bit, like so. Now we're gonna hold setting and turn the tuning knob here, and we're gonna go to VCO2 tuning. We're gonna set it to 1 semitone, giving us very granular control over the tuning of these oscillators. We're gonna go and do the same for VCO number 1. And now we're gonna do something which I think a lot of synth nerds like. I'm gonna detune the oscillators. And we can go totally crazy, but that will not sound very good. So let's just find a sweet spot. That sounds lovely. And before we introduce some reverb and delay, we're gonna do something which I think a lot of you will like. So. We're introducing analog stereo spread of the voices. And once you introduce this, you just can't go back. So here's without any stereo spread. And here's with. No pun intended. Now let's add in the sub for the second oscillator, giving us a nice bottom end. That's lovely. We can also introduce some modulation. So we can go to the first page here. Pitch global is already set up. So I'm gonna do LFO number 2 here to pitch global. Pretty crazy. Just a bit, and we're gonna fade it in. And I'm gonna take LFO number 1 here and set it to voice panning and make sure that LFO number 1 and number 2 is in poly mode so that it triggers a different cycle with every note being pressed. So now we can hear the panning. You can hear it, but that's too crazy. You're gonna slow it down and just have a gentle bit. And now we can introduce reverb and delay. Introduce some resonance, and we're gonna set up a modulation here for resonance. I'm thinking perhaps LFO number 3 here. Gonna turn that up a bit. And of course we need to use Aftertouch, so I'm gonna set that up to filter cutoff. And we go here, Aftertouch, turn it up, and it's set to poly Aftertouch. And listen closely now to how the filter is opening up and closing per individual note, and also the sound is being moved around in the stereo space. While I didn't have this routing on the patch I showed you previously, I think this could be a lot of fun. So I'm going to set up VCO2 and VCO number 1 here. And using Aftertouch, polyphonic Aftertouch, we are going to change the wave shape. So that's very beautiful. And while it might not be the most obvious thing, I think that the small nuances is what brings a synth sound to life.
So that was pretty much what went into creating the previous sound that you heard. Now, if we want to create a B sound, we can just go here to morph and we can copy A to B. And now if I move the morph knob here to the B position, it's the same sound. So now we can press here, edit B, and we can make changes to it. So now I made some changes to the B sound, and here's the A sound again. And we can move over to the B sound. Yet again, we can find some beautiful sweet spots in between. And I do think that if there's any selling point beyond the sound of the Polybrute, it is how easy it is to actually work with. The modular workflow with its mod matrix is very easy to use, it's fast to set up, and I think that that makes it a very appealing synthesizer.
If you made it this far into the video, I want to end with some personal thoughts, not so much about the Polybrute, but about the channel and where I'm at in my YouTube synth journey. So the original Polybrute came out around when I built my first pro studio. I was going full-time into making synth videos. It was the whole thing. I moved my stuff from my house to the studio, which was across town, and I spent so much time working on that studio. It was quite a stressful time during the pandemic as well. And the Polybrute came out and I made a video about it. I also made a sound demo. And now a couple of years later, I'm testing the Polybrute 12 again in a new studio because we've just finished building my new pro home studio. It's in a separate building from the main house. We renovated it, and it just feels a little special that this studio got done pretty much when the Polybrute 12 came out and I got the chance to test it. So thank you, Arturia, for sending this one over, and thank you for watching and being here and just watching this random Swedish person test synths. Have a great day. Talk to you later.